Thinking about going gluten-free, or maybe you already are gluten-free? Well, before radically changing your life, or maybe you're already hating it right now, watch this video first, because there may be a better way. Hey everyone, welcome back to Grains and Grit. On this channel, we talk about all things real whole grains from a biblical perspective. Many of us, with it being a new year, have resolutions or maybe goals on our brain. And we all know what the biggest one is that people usually have, and that's to lose weight or maybe to eat healthier, all things related to diet. One of those is typically where people decide to drop gluten. Now this may be because you've heard that you may lose weight, getting rid of gluten, or maybe you're considering it for health reasons. You have issues with gluten. But before you jump on yet another one of those flashy little diet bandwagons, I really wanted to sit down and talk with you guys about true facts when it comes to gluten, to bread, to grains, all of those things that many times are never, ever mentioned by the gluten-free gurus out there. So in this video, I'm going to discuss with you some of the most common ignored facts that people just don't talk about. But I'm also going to talk about of the people who actually should avoid gluten and give y'all real wholesome alternatives if you, for whatever reason, do need to go gluten-free, or maybe you want to know what healthier options are there for gluten-free options other than, highly processed foods. We're going to be talking about that as well. The first ignored fact that all of these, wheat belly, grain brain, most of them just completely ignore, or they maybe mention it just a little bit, is the fact that the bread that you buy in the store, that you're getting at the fast food restaurant or the regular restaurant, the flour you're buying from the store, that's not real bread or real flour. It is not true wheat. Even your whole wheat that you purchase from the store is not real whole grain. It's made up with white flour. So what they have done with the bread in the store and your typical flour is that they strip the bran and the germ from it. And that's pretty much removing everything except gluten and starch. You're already starting off with literally nothing but gluten and starch. And then they take this fake flour, they then bake bread with it to sell you in the store. And then a lot of times, if you look on the label, they've added more gluten to it. So it doesn't surprise me at all that people have gluten sensitivities, or, they just cannot have the typical bread that you find like everywhere, that gives you issues, because again, all that has is gluten and starch and sometimes added gluten to it. That is not the way that God designed wheat to be consumed. So people generally here in America especially are consuming far more gluten than the way that God intended it, especially gluten without all the other things that He created to be consumed with gluten to help you digest it. So that's the very first thing, and the number one thing that I really want you to understand is that the bread in the store, the flour in the store, that's not even real wheat. And you possibly may not even have an issue with gluten or wheat, and we'll get to that in a bit. Ignored fact number two that the grain deniers rarely point out, or they do, but they twist it a little bit, and that is the simple fact that humanity has survived on grains as their main dietary source for thousands of years. So if gluten is so horrible nowadays that it's giving people fits, how is it that humanity survived for thousands of years consuming it? And as a main staple, I may add. And the plainest answer to that is because they were consuming real whole grains, not the fake, highly processed stuff that we are consuming these days. They also just did not have processed foods. I mean, let's face it, processed foods did not become a thing until, the 1920s, early 1900s, especially by the 1950s here in America. I mean, for the fast food industry, processed foods, all of those things just really exploded in the early 20th century. So we've been through all of this time with no processed foods at all. Now, one argument that they like to point out is the fact, well, yes, humanity lived for thousands of years on grains with no issues, because nowadays we have this Franken wheat. The wheat nowadays is not the wheat that they consumed for thousands of years. And I've done a video about this. First of all, there is no Franken wheat. There is no genetically modified wheat that has been approved in the United States. Now, they are trying at this moment, but it has not been approved in the United States. There are other countries at the moment that are growing and using genetically modified wheat, but as far as here in the United States, that is not allowed to do. It's not Franken wheat. All wheat has done is it has just been hybridized like many of our other foods. It is a natural process, but also ones that humans can participate in as well. But bottom line, it's just still wheat, bred with wheat to come up with a better crop. That's all our wheat is nowadays, hybridized, but you still have your ancient grains that you can use, such as spelt, einkorn, kamut, one of those grains. But the problem is most people don't really go to those real ancient grains. They generally just want to throw out wheat and gluten completely, or they use these ancient grains, but it's still a processed ancient grain like einkorn flour that you can buy, not exactly what it should be. Which leads us to the big ignored fact number 3. Most people that I've noticed who have issues with gluten can handle real bread and real wheat that has been freshly milled at home. So this is what I'm talking about. Wheat comes in wheat berries. They are seeds. That's all they are. They're not anything demonic or anything like that. And wheat berries are then milled into flour to make flour that you use for bread, for cooking. And think of it, flour. You know, we all know what flour looks like. And you have two options. One is that you can actually buy the wheat berries yourself and mill them at home yourself to actually get true, real, whole grain, 100% freshly milled wheat. Or you can buy the fake stuff from the store. And the difference between those two is key, and it is monumental to whether you can consume bread or not. Whenever you mill your wheat at home, you are consuming the entire wheat berry, and that includes the bran and the germ, which is where pretty much all of your nutrients and your fiber exist, with the gluten and the starch as well. But the thing is gluten can have issues digesting, but especially whenever you do not consume the fiber that God created in the wheat berry to go with it. There's a high amount of fiber in the wheat berries, and God probably put it there to help you digest everything with the wheat berry. Many people have said, well, I got rid of bread and I finally felt amazing. Well, and I've even had comments like this on this channel. Yeah. And my question to you is, which one? What bread did you get rid of? Did you get rid of fake bread that was nothing but gluten and starch and maybe even extra gluten added to it? Or were you actually milling your wheat, baking your bread at home, doing this all yourself and consuming that, and that's what you got rid of and felt better? And I find it that most people don't answer that question, interestingly enough. Because yeah, I agree. If you got rid of the fake bread stuff, it's no wonder you feel better. Anyone feels better. I feel better not eating the fake bread. It's almost the same as saying that, well, I cut out peanut M&Ms because peanuts are horrible and I feel better. You were having peanuts that were covered in chocolate and candy coating and a lot of chemicals and dyes. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Have you ever had a real peanut? So you really have to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. I received multiple testimonies and comments from people who have legit issues with the bread from the store, the flour they would buy from the store. Even if they took the flour from the store and made bread at home, they still were having issues with it. But when they switched to actual 100% real whole grain bread made from freshly milled wheat, surprisingly, they were able to consume it with no issues whatsoever. And it tasted really good as well. Now this leads me to ignored fact number 4. And that is that it's possible that ultimately you have an issue with your gut. Science is really catching up to the importance of gut health, calling it our second brain, the importance of all the good bacteria that we have in our gut that helps us with digestion, with our overall health, all of those things. Our gut health is so important, and science is still catching up, trying to figure out what all it does. Luckily for us, we have a creator God who knew what he was doing all along and created food for our benefit that our little gut bacteria loves. And wheat, real whole grains, is one of those. It's an excellent prebiotic that our gut bacteria feed on and loves. One thing I want to kind of park it here is I have had a few people tell me that when they would switch to freshly milled wheat, that they still had issues, maybe have heartburn, or maybe they were still just not feeling that well. And I've received a few testimonies from people of what they did to help overcome that, because they were severely gut health compromised. One lady I know messaged me, said that what she did was for 2 years, she consumed homemade chicken stock every single day and really focused on getting her gut health back. And she went from not being able to consume any wheat, any bread, nothing like that, to where now with freshly milled wheat, she has no problem whatsoever. Another amazing testimony was a mother emailed me, this was several months ago, where her 6-year-old daughter, so this is a child, was really having issues with bread. She could not have typical bread. Really, they'd gone on a gluten-free diet for her because just it wasn't good. What they did is they did switch to freshly milled wheat, but they started by soaking the grains before she consumed them. That included oatmeal, all of those things. They would use kefir, which is a fermented drink, or yogurt. I think really good gut health drinks. They would make sourdough from the bread, and that's what they fed their 6-year-old daughter for about 6 months. And then she was able to handle regular freshly milled bread that they would make at home. They did not have to soak it. They did not have to do sourdough. And she was able to handle that while still unable to handle the bread and the flour from the stores. So I found that an amazing testimony to the power of this, but they did take it slow. So that may be the case for you if you switch to freshly milled wheat and you still have problems. Let's start focusing on that gut health as well. So that leads me to the next part, is who should avoid gluten? Do I believe that every single person should be consuming, whole wheat and gluten and all those things? And I would say technically not every single person, but the majority. Yes, you should be milling your grains, consuming freshly milled wheat, and just whole grains in general. But there is a part of the population, it is a tiny part of the population that simply, no matter what, cannot handle gluten. These people include celiacs. Now, there are 2 different types of celiacs. You have really severe celiacs that have pretty much had issues their entire life. And then others are called, it's autoimmune celiac, where they've been able to consume bread for the most part, and then all of a sudden they're in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, and they now have issues to gluten. They are now reacting to it. Bottom line, celiac, I was surprised to see that there was some conflicting research on it, but bottom line, scientists, the doctors, are calling it an autoimmune disease. Now, disclaimer here, I'm not a doctor, I'm not in the medical field. Do your own research, consult with your doctor, so on and so forth. This is my opinion based on my research. And so, from what I've seen, whenever I hear that something is an autoimmune disease, I instantly think that there's a possibility to heal it, especially if you didn't have it and now you have it. So many times I do know people that were diagnosed with celiacs, autoimmune celiacs. Again, this would be if you've never had issues with it your entire life. Suddenly you're having issues with it. I do think this goes back to a gut health issue, consuming fake bread for all those years. And I would, if this was me, I would try freshly milled wheat and see how your body reacts. Unfortunately, something like this, you do kind of have to use yourself as a guinea pig. Do listen to your body. Again, I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. but I'm just telling you what I would be doing. So that is something I would focus on curing, getting the best gut health bacteria that I could possibly get. I mean, strong probiotics, your yogurts, kefir, your fermented foods, really healing the gut. I mean, at the very least, it's not gonna hurt you, to get a better gut health. It's not gonna hurt you. And then see if I can actually consume real freshly milled wheat. Again, you may not be able to. It just depends on the severity of the celiacs. But celiacs is only affecting 1% of the population, at least here in the United States. So it is not as common of an issue as people are making it out to be these days. Oh, it's celiac disease. Like it's super, super common. It's still only affecting 1% of the population. So 99% of y'all should be milling your grains. So that now leads us to some actual gluten-free options that are better than just highly processed foods that are labeled as gluten-free from the store. So if someone in my family or I had to be gluten-free, I would definitely stick to still real whole grains, but the more naturally gluten-free ones. So you still have plenty of gluten-free grains such as your corn, your rice, oats, although I have seen that you have to make sure that oats are processed in a facility where there has been no gluten, because there can be some cross-contamination there. You also have millet, sorghum, amaranth, quinoa. There are so many beneficial grains that God created for us to consume that are naturally gluten-free. So I still am a huge proponent of, milling your own grains. I know that Sue Becker has a gluten-free all-purpose flour recipe that you actually mill yourself. So if you have her cookbook, her book, The Essential Homegrown Flour Book, I will link it below. This is what it looks like here. She does have a gluten-free flour recipe in there of grains that you mill yourself. And that is definitely the best option. No need to buy the gluten-free flour. I highly recommend that you mill it yourself to ensure that you are getting all of the beneficial nutrients from those grains, milling it yourself. So the bottom line with gluten is, let us not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's make sure that we are comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Yes, throw out your fake bread, your fake flour, and embrace real wheat, real grains, real flour that you can only get milling yourself at home. God gave us this food for our good. It has sustained humanity for thousands of years, and Jesus compared himself to the bread of life. Why the bread of life if it was such poison? So hopefully this was helpful for you guys. Any questions, comment below. And as always, I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.